Hello students. Once again, my name is Johnson Oko, an Associate Professor of Finance, and our course remains BFN 104, Element of Banking. To spice it up, our topic today is on savings and investment. I expect your participation and full involvement in this class. Thank you. Hello. Yes. Um, Our intended learning outcomes for today's class are as follows. One, at the end of this class, the students should be able to define the concepts of savings and investments. Two, the students should be able to state the different types of investments. Three, the students should be able to discuss the theory of investment. Four, students should be able to draw an analysis of the determinants of investment. And five, students should be able to discuss the paradox of trades. Finally, the student or the learner should be able to draw a relationship between savings and investment. By way of introduction, the economy is a complex web of activities, but by and large, it hovers around the productive and the monetary sectors. The monetary sector specifically is anchored by the banking sector. Suffice to say that the banking sector is the most active financial institution in Nigeria and even in most economies, which in turn drives the entire economic process of any polity. However, in the long run, it is strongly believed that at equilibrium, savings must be equal with investment. What then is savings? Savings is defined as the difference between disposal or disposable income and consumption. In terms of economic units, the concept of savings refers to that portion of disposable income which is not finally consumed but somewhat reserved for the future. So savings is that portion of your income that is not consumed. You could also say savings is deferred consumption. So national income is actually the totality of what is rewarded to the economic unit for effort put in place to generate wealth. Here we have a formula that depicts that y is equals to c plus x plus I plus g plus the difference between export and import. That's x minus n. Meaning of investment. What is investment? Investment is the sacrifice of certain economic resources for future uncertain benefits in terms of resources. It is sacrifice. When you defer your consumption, it is sacrifice. When you expect future benefits, but don't forget that these benefits are so uncertain because of the vagaries, economic vagaries. Again, investment refers to additional stock of physical capital. Investment refers to expenditure incurred or spent on the acquisition of capital goods. So it is not on recurrent expenditure, but it's an expenditure on capital goods, goods that can generate further goods or further income. Investment at the same time refers to the purchase of real tangible assets such as machines, factories, stock of inventory, which are used in the production of goods and services for future use as opposed to present consumption. Types of investment. We have different types of investments as contained here. We have the fixed investment, we have the inventory investment, and we have the replacement investment. What then is fixed investment? This is the purchase of new fixed capital, such as machines, tools, and etc. Whereas inventory investment involves the building of stocks of goods and raw materials. Inventory investments. Thirdly, we have the replacement investment. These are investments made to replace worn-out capital goods resulting from their use in the productive process. So when the fixed investments begin to wear and tear over time, they are being replaced, and when they are replaced, they are forms of investment. Forms of investment as identified by Keynes. Keynes has identified two major forms of investment. First is the autonomous investment, while the second type of investment is the induced investment. Autonomous investment is a form of investment that does not change with the changes in the income level, and as such is independent of income. So autonomous investment does not change with changes in income. So when the income is changing, the autonomous investment remains constant. It is usually horizontal. It is mostly undertaken by government, and it includes projects such as power, transport, and communication. Autonomous investment is affected more by population growth and technical progress than income level. So, while autonomous investment is not affected by income, it can be affected by growth in population or technical progress. Interestingly, autonomous investment can be described to be what? Income inelastic. Inelastic in the sense that the income level, though it changes, but the investment does not change with income. So now, what is induced investment? Induced investment, as the name implies, is induced, influenced, or affected by changes in income level. If income level increases, consumption demand would also increase to meet up with the investment. Therefore, investment must increase. So induced investment is that form of investment that changes as income changes. So once the income level changes, the consumption would also change or increase, and investment at the same time will increase. Theory of investment. Theory of investment we have here is the acceleration theory of investment. According to this theory, when income or consumption increases, investment will increase at a multiplier amount. So that means that when the income or consumption increases, investment is bound to increase. So this is induced investment. It is not autonomous. So when income or consumption of the people increases, the greater amount of these commodities will have to be produced. Since their consumption has increased, therefore production will increase. And if the production increases, therefore investment will increase. So there is a sync, there's a relationship between income, consumption, and investments, which is propelled by production. Since in this case, investment is induced by changes in income or consumption, this is known as induced investment, as we have noted before. The acceleration is in the numerical value of the relation between the increase in investment resulting from increase in income. That is the acceleration that is noted. Determinants of investment. Investment generally are undertaken because of the expected future return. That is, whether the returns expected would or would not exceed the amount invested today. So people invest because of the future returns, because of the expected returns on the investment. For an investment to be made, there are various factors that must be considered. So these factors that must be considered are also known as determinants of investment. They are: one, the cost of capital investment. You will look at the cost of capital. How much is the cost to be incurred in the acquisition of the capital assets? What's the cost of the investment? So when you look at the cost of capital or cost of asset or cost of investment, you will also closely, that's number two, look at the expected rate of returns. The expected rate of returns is what is the expected returns. How much are you expecting as income returns on what has been invested? And closely to it, what affects investment is also the market rate of interest. The market rate of interest talks about the ruling rate. What is the rate? How much is the cost of capital in terms of discount factor? What's the expected rate of interest? The monetary policy rate? These are factors that affect investment. So Keynes summed up these factors in his concept of marginal efficiency of capital, MEC. Marginal efficiency of capital, therefore, refers to the highest rate of return expected from an additional unit of a capital asset over its cost. It is the rate of profit expected from an extra unit of a capital asset. As such, the MEC, the marginal efficiency of capital, is the percentage of profit expected from a given investment on a capital asset. Keynes therefore defined the marginal efficiency of capital in the following words. I define the marginal efficiency of capital as being equal to the rate of discount, which would make the present value of the series of annuities given by the return expected from the capital asset during its life just equal to its supply price. students. Another interesting subtitle is the paradox of thrift. The concept of thrift was first introduced by Bernard Meadville in the Table of Bills in 1214. Thriftness is often seen as a virtue. This is because an increase in thrift on the part of an individual leads to greater savings and wealth. The same thrift is also seen as a public virtue because if people consume less, thereby increasing their savings, then more resources can be devoted to producing capital goods, which leads to increase in income, output, and employment. According to Keynes, therefore, thrift is a public virtue if the increase in the propensity to save is responded by an equally high propensity to invest. Otherwise, it becomes a public vice. So, Keynes has identified that for thrift to be described as a public virtue, the increase in propensity to save, the willingness to save, must be married with a correspondent propensity to invest. Otherwise, if the propensity to invest is much lower than the propensity to save, then thrift will not be a public virtue, or rather it will be a public vice, because it will cause more harm than what is intended to get or derive from the savings. So there must be a culture of increasing savings at the same time investing such savings. Otherwise, it will lead to a public vice. So the paradox of thrift is basically pointing out that if people decide to save more, they may end up saving less, unless if the increase in propensity to save is accompanied by a higher propensity to invest. So there must be a higher propensity to invest to show that, or to compensate for the propensity to save. Otherwise, it would be a paradox of thrift, when the propensity to save does not, correspond, or is not even higher by a propensity to invest. Therefore, we have a class activity now. We have been able to look at the concept of savings. We've looked at the concept of investment. We've looked at the determinants of investment. We've looked at the forms of investment. Now, we are going to take a class activity to see whether we understand what we have been doing so far. And what's the class activity all about? It's all about your being able to identify the two forms of investment according to Keynes, and also being able to discuss at least one of them. So having looked at that, we're now going to look at the relationship between savings and investment. Like we started, there is actually a relationship. We want to know, what's the relationship between savings? Savings, like we've defined it to mean deferred consumption. Consumption that is deferred for the future. The relationship between savings and investment has caused a series of controversies over the years. While some argue that savings and investment are equal, whether at equilibrium or disequilibrium, others argue that savings and investment are equal only at equilibrium. The pre-Keynesian economists argue, or arguments include that savings and investment are not equal for certain reasons. So we're going to look at the reasons why savings and investments are not equal, as argued by some pre-Keynesian economists. One is that savings and investment are made by two different classes of people. While investment is undertaken by entrepreneurs, savings is done by the general public. Two, savings and investment depend upon different factors and are made for different purposes and motives. Three is that they also pointed out that the excess of investments over saving has led banks to create new credit. So these are reasons why these proponents have argued that savings cannot be equal or be at equilibrium with investment. Equality of savings and investment. Keynes went further to prove and express his assertion about the equality of savings and investment with the following equation. Keynes argued that national income is equal to consumption plus investment. By designating consumption with letter C and investment with letter I, while national income was assigned letter Y. The above equation represents the production or income side of the national income, and the equation below represents the expenditure side. So we're going to look at the expenditure side. So while from the income side, national income is equal to consumption plus investment, from the expenditure side, national income is equal to consumption plus savings. That is, Y is equal to C plus S. From the above equation, it is clear that national income is equal to the sum of consumption and investment, and also equal to the sum of consumption and savings. Recall that from the national income side, we agreed that income is equal to consumption plus investment, whereas from the expenditure side, income is equal to consumption plus savings. From the above equation, it is clear that national income is equal to the sum of consumption and investment. Hence, consumption plus savings is equal to consumption plus investment. So if you take the income side of the equation and you take the consumption side, you would agree with me that C plus S is equal to C plus I. But we have a constant in these two. You have the consumption that is both constant in the consumption side, that's in the national income side, and we have consumption also that's also constant in the expenditure side. So by the time C cancelled out with C, we now have that savings is equals to what? Investment. That's S is equals to I. Students, so far so good, we have been able to look at the concept of savings and investment. We looked at the meaning of savings, we also looked at the meaning of investment. We have also looked at the types of investment. We've also seen the forms of investment, and we've also seen the theories of investment. And again, we have seen the determinants of investment. So that's the lecture for savings and investment. Thank you.